Today we're going to be talking about the final three occurrences of the word Hesed in the Torah. So, let's get to it.
Welcome to Now Let's Be Honest. We are in our Hesed series, part 8. And we are wrapping up the Torah today. If you are new to these series of these videos, you can go back. We have a few other ones. Go back all the way to the beginning where we kind of explained what the word Hesed is and kind of our goal of this series. And then we've been walking through from Genesis all the way through to now the Torah. And we're going to keep on going all the way through the Old Testament. And then if you're not new, welcome back. We're glad to have you back. And we are trucking along. We are getting there slowly but surely. It's kind of a passion project, but yeah, we're just kind of taking it one occurrence at a time.
Yep. And as you can see, I'm actually wearing a shirt that translates to "For His Hesed endures forever."
Yeah, very
which
fitting.
it's a phrase we haven't encountered so far in the Bible, but as we progress through this series, we're going to see it a whole lot. Normally I wear my Now Let's Be Honest shirt, but this is actually a shirt that we had created for the Bible study group that I lead. And so I just thought I'd wear it because we just got these shirts in, and so there you go.
Yeah.
Also, just some real quick announcement. This is actually going to be the last video in this series for a short while because we thought we'd go through the Torah and then take a break from this series, and we'll go back to my prophet series going through the book of Isaiah. And then once I run out of material there, we'll come back to this because this is always one that we can kind of fall back on because it doesn't take a whole lot of preparation, whereas the Isaiah one takes a whole lot of preparation, and so that's kind of just slowly but surely setting that up. And so we'll go to Isaiah for a little bit, and I might even have her join me with those. We'll see. She said that she might want to join there, so we might do that. And then so that's just some quick housekeeping stuff. Other quick announcements real quick. If you want access to these slides, you can get those at nowletsbehonest.com/resources. And also, if you want to support us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/David Tate, or you can click on the links in the descriptions down below. Other than that, could you open us up in a word of prayer, and we will hop into Hesed in Deuteronomy.
Yes, absolutely. Lord, we thank you so much for this time that you've given us, allowing us to gather together, even over this media platform, to be able to talk about you and your word that you've revealed to us. Lord, I pray that as we go into this study, that we walk into it humbly, ready to listen to your wisdom that you have to offer us, and to allow us to understand truly what this word Hesed means, and what it means, how we relate to you and how you relate to us. I pray that you open our hearts and our minds as we go through this study and allow us to be changed whenever we leave. Allow our actions and our words and our thoughts to be glorifying to you, not only during the study, but as we leave it and throughout the rest of our day, and throughout the rest of our lives, Lord. We thank you for all that you are. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. So we find ourselves talking about Hesed in kind of the back half of the Torah here. We've already talked about Genesis. It showed up 11 times there. We talked about Exodus. It showed up 4 times there. And then what we've seen so far is that Hesed shows up 6 other times in the final 3 books of the Torah. It showed up once in Leviticus. We talked about that one. That was kind of more of the awkward one to go through because that's right in the middle of the sexual prohibition stuff in Leviticus. And then we went into Numbers, and that actually shows up back to back in Numbers chapter 14, and that was actually a really good discussion there. And now today what we're going to do is we're going to cover these final 3 instances in Deuteronomy. And as you can see, really it shows up in 2 primary places. One of them is actually going to be a place that we already discussed back in Exodus because it's literally just restating the 10 Commandments, and it shows up there. And then we're also going to go into Deuteronomy chapter 7. And so what I figured we could do real quick is we're just going to, I'll briefly recap us on the Leviticus and Numbers occurrences, and then I'm going to have you give us some context on Deuteronomy because you've been reading that more recently than I have. Even this morning you were reading it, so there you go. Okay, so in Leviticus, we did encounter Hesed there in Leviticus chapter 20. That was in the sexual prohibitions thing, and this was actually the first time that we experienced Hesed in a negative manner, right? This is actually where we actually saw that Hesed can be a negative thing if wrongly applied, right? Hesed is all about giving somebody something that is unexpected, and it's something that they have no right to expect, something that is undeserved. And so if you are giving a bad person something good, that's a good example of Hesed, right? Because you are being gracious to them and you are showing them mercy and love, and that's awesome. But if you are giving a good person something bad, that is bad Hesed, right? That is a disgrace. It's the opposite of graciousness.
Right.
And so that's what we saw in Leviticus chapter 20. And whenever we went on into Numbers chapter 14, basically this is in the narrative where basically the people of Israel are being sent by God to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, right? I think a lot of the times we think of the whole 40-year wilderness thing as being like Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Right.
But really, no, Exodus, Leviticus, and the first half of Numbers is really written with the anticipation that the people are going to be going straight into the promised land. And they're only going to be in the wilderness for like 2 years. But in around Numbers 14, we see that the people have been acting up again. And because they are not trusting in God, God says, you're going to be here for 40 years. And you're going to be wandering here. And your descendants are the ones who are going to go into the land. And it was in the back half of Numbers 14 where we actually got to see Moses mentioning the words Hesed twice, and he's actually referencing Exodus chapter 34, right? And so he's actually calling back to the previous instances of Hesed that we already talked about in our Exodus videos. And so that's really cool how we see that Hesed is starting to show up not necessarily in new occurrences, but we have people calling back to the fact that God himself identified himself as a God of Hesed. And we're going to see that again today. Like I said, our first occurrence today is actually going to be just repeating what we already talked about in Exodus. So we'll be able to go through that one fairly quickly. Just because it's going to be repetition, because it's constantly going back to who God has already established himself to be. But that leads us to Deuteronomy chapter 5, which is an entirely new book of the Bible. Right, we're in Deuteronomy, we're no longer in Leviticus or Numbers, and so could you just give us a recap about kind of what the whole general thrust of Deuteronomy is, what's going on there, and what leads us to Deuteronomy 5?
Yeah, so the Israelites are trying to get to the promised land, but God tells Moses that he actually, and a lot of the elders, that they actually are not going to get to see the promised land. So Moses is going to lead them all the way up to the promised land. He'll be able to see it, but he's not going to be able to enter it. But instead, Caleb and Joshua are going to be the two people that are going to lead the Israelites into the promised land. So when we enter into Deuteronomy, Moses is kind of going to start restating the laws and different things that the Israelites have been told, and he's going to tell them that you need to follow these laws, these decrees that God has given in order for things to go well with you. And he warns them whenever they enter the promised land that it is not an empty land. There are enemies there. The Canaanites are there, Amorites are there, all these different people are there who worship pagan gods. They don't worship the one true God. They do not worship Yahweh. So they are going to be against the Israelites, but God is going to fight for them. So Moses continues to tell them to not fear, that God is going to fight for you as long as you put your faith and your trust in him. So he's going to kind of restate the 10 Commandments, and he's going to talk about all the different laws that they've already heard. And then in Deuteronomy 4, he's actually going to kind of go to the side and talk about really kind of who God is. He kind of expounds on really why God is, like, why he encapsulates Hesed, basically. He's going to talk about things that he's delivered them from, and that even whenever they do turn away, when they go into the promised land, that if they just cry out to God, that he will come to them and fight for them again. So he kind of really expounds on the whole Exodus 34 thing whenever God talks about how he is a God that's slow to anger, how he's abounding in Hesed. He basically explains to them what that means, and it's a really beautiful moment. He talks about his mercy and his compassion and his love and all that stuff, and that leads us straight into Deuteronomy 5, where he's going to start talking about the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. I've always liked the book of Deuteronomy a whole lot. Whenever it comes to just studying like the Torah, Genesis, I love. Exodus, I love. Leviticus, amazing. Numbers, ooh, I have a tough time getting through Numbers. There's some high points in there, but I have a tougher time with Numbers. But Deuteronomy is really cool, and I think the reason I like Deuteronomy so much is because it really reads like the last will and testament of Moses, right? Because at the beginning of it, Moses learns, I'm not making it into the promised land, right? And so he's been leading these people for 40 years through the wilderness. The promised land is literally just right across the river, right? Like they're right there, and he's gonna die looking into it. But he knows he's not going to be able to lead them in. And so he needs to prepare these people. And I love whenever you see moments like this. You see this a lot throughout the Bible, right? I mean, you see this with Moses. You're going to see this again with like Paul. Paul's going to write 2 Timothy, right? And he knows he's about to die. And so every single word Paul says in 2 Timothy, it rings really powerfully because he's saying like, this, I know that my time to come, like the time to end has come.
Yeah.
And you see Jesus saying that right before he ascends, right? He has certain words he says to the disciples, and those words literally give birth to the church, right? He's like, take this to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth. And they're like, okay. Right? And so the final words of somebody really kind of do hold a lot of weight, especially when they know that they're about to die, right? I mean, if you don't know you're about to die, the words probably, they'll be random.
Yeah.
But Moses knows that he's going to die, and he knows that he's passing the torch. Yeah. And that's why the book Deuteronomy, it just means second law, right? He's restating the law for people in a different context. Whenever you read the laws in the earlier books of the Torah, they're mainly for people dwelling in the wilderness. But now, they're not going to be dwelling in the wilderness. They're going to be dwelling in the promised land. They're not going to all be around one little camp. They're going to be dispersed amongst their tribes and all this different stuff. And he's like, this is going to change things. And so he's restating this stuff to encourage them to really just follow after God.
Yeah.
And so, real quick, I just want to read a little bit ahead of this, just to see if we can get a little bit something different out of, because, I mean, if we just study this, it's going to be the exact same as what we did in Exodus, right? But I want us to understand that even how the Ten Commandments show up here, they're from a little bit of a different perspective, right? In Exodus chapter 20, when the Ten Commandments were spoken for the first time, it was God speaking to the people from Mount Sinai, and they heard the voice of God. And this was before Moses went up to talk with God individually, right? So this is like everybody hearing the voice of God. He says these Ten Commandments. But then, I'm just going to start in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 44. This is the law that Moses set before the Israelites. These are the stipulations, statutes, and ordinances that Moses spoke to the Israelites after he had brought them up out of Egypt, in the Transjordan, in the valley opposite of Beth Peor, in the land of King Sihon of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon. It is he whom Moses and the Israelites attacked after they came out of Egypt. They possessed the land and that of the king of Og of Bashan, both of whom were Amorite kings in the Transjordan to the east. Their territory extended from Aroer to the edge of Arnon Valley as far as Mount Sion, that is, Hermon, including all the Rift Valley of the Transjordan in the east of the sea and the Rift Valley beneath the slopes of Pisgah. And I know that all sounds really boring, but the whole point is that this is a dramatically different context. They are no longer at Sinai. Now they have 40 more years under their belt. It has been 40 years since they heard this, and now this is an entirely new generation. Right? The old generation, they have passed away. These are the young kids have grown up. They are adults now. They're about to enter into this land. Moses is about to die, and he's telling them, hey guys, this is what God has to say to you. And so it says, this is the law that he gave to them, right? It's no longer God speaking down from the mountain. Instead, it's Moses articulating what God spoke. Then you go to chapter 5. Then Moses called all the people of Israel together and said to them, listen, Israel, to the statutes and ordinances that I am about to deliver to you today. Learn them and be careful to keep them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. He did not make this covenant with our ancestors, but with us, who are here today, all of us living now. Notice what he says there, right? He didn't make it with our ancestors, he made it with us. Interesting, because this is the second generation, right? And so he's saying, hey, this covenant endures, right? Yes, he made it with your fathers, but he also made it with you. The Lord spoke face to face with you at the mountain from the middle of the fire. I was standing between the Lord and you at that time to reveal the Lord's message to you, because you were afraid of the fire and would not go up the mountain. He said, and then we get to what we're saying here, right? This is just the beginning of the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord your God, he who brought you from the land of Egypt and from the place of slavery. You must not have any other gods beside me. You must not make for yourself an image of anything in heaven above, on earth below, or in the waters beneath. You must not worship or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. I punish the sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons for the sins of the father who reject me. But I show covenant faithfulness, Hesed, to the thousands who choose me and keep my commandments. You must not make use of the name of the Lord your God for worthless purposes, for the Lord will not exonerate anyone who abuses his name that way. All right, so those are just the first, three? Those are the first three commandments, right? First, 1, 2, 3. What do you think?
I think it's very fitting that I think the Ten Commandments are repeated here, especially where we see Hesed occur, because we're now dealing with this new generation of people who are going to go into the Promised Land. They have the opportunity to start over, to be faithful, and to trust God. And so we see this part where it's talking about you can either reject him and there's going to be punishment, or God leans towards showing Hesed for thousands and thousands of years to generations. You can choose that. So it's almost like they're standing here, Moses is saying this, and he's like, these are your two options. your, like, fathers chose the punishment, which is why they did not get to see the promised land. But you have the option to choose his Hesed. Yeah. And to, like, embrace that and to go into the promised land being faithful to him. Yeah. So it's kind of fitting that I think the Ten Commandments are spoken here. Yeah, and that I actually find that very fitting, right? Because if you think about it, in the 40 years that have passed, they have experienced the truth of these things, right? I mean, like, they've actually experienced this stuff. I am the Lord your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt, from the place of slavery. This is what their parents experienced, and I mean, they might have been, we don't know how old these kids were, right? They were probably kids at the time, right? They've heard stories at least. You know, it's not like every single person died. It's probably the adults who were responsible. They're the ones who died and didn't get to go in. And so God delivered them. They got to see this. They probably, like, some of their earliest memories are probably God doing these things for them. And he says, you must not have any other gods beside me. Well, they have seen their parents struggling with this, right? And they've seen the punishment for that, right? Whenever their fathers worship different gods, God did not like that. You must not make for yourself an image of anything in heaven above, on earth below, or in the waters beneath. Just a few chapters after the Ten Commandments were stated for the first time, what did their parents do? Their parents did the exact same thing. Like, they literally broke this by making a golden calf and calling it Yahweh, right? And they worshipped it as if it were God. They made an image of God. You must not worship or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. They've experienced that jealousy because they saw how God responded, and God was very jealous. On multiple occasions, he wanted to just destroy them. And said, you know what? Let's end this. Right? If you're not willing to be faithful to me, let's just cut it off. Let's just call this covenant deal off. And God's very jealous. A lot of people don't like the jealousy of God, and I don't know why. I think that's kind of flattering a little bit. I'm like, wow, like, you're jealous over us? Like, that's crazy. Right, Like, a lot of people don't like his jealousy. I'm like, okay, that's kind of silly. I punish the sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons for the sin of the fathers who reject me. They've experienced this, right? They have experienced how, you know, I mean, just think about how the sins of the father are passed down to the son in this case. Right? Their fathers rejected God. They didn't trust God to deliver them into the promised land. And as a result, these kids grew up in the wilderness, right? They did not grow up in the land where their parents were going to get to establish their homes and stuff like that. No, instead it got pushed back a generation. Now you have a younger generation who's going to go into the land, and they're going to have to do the fighting. They're going to have to do the establishing. They're going to have to do all this stuff, which should have been their parents' responsibilities. But they're experiencing the consequences of their father's sins, right? This isn't to say that they're guilty of it. It just means that they're dealing with the consequences of it. And so when you read these 10 Commandments in this place, it really does have a little bit of a different impact. Right? Because now it's no longer God speaking from the mountain. It's Moses speaking from probably a mountaintop, right? Calling down to them. Right? And he's saying, guys, this is the deal. Y'all have seen this take place. And Moses, even right before this, he reminds them, he's like, y'all, like, the reason I'm telling you this is because y'all didn't want to stand before God, right? And so y'all don't get to hear it the way that your fathers did, or the way that you maybe did when you were a little kid. You don't get to hear it that way. And then you get to verse 10. But I show Hesed to thousands who choose me and keep my commandments. And so you see that once again. Okay, he'll show his wrath to 3 or 4 generations, but his Hesed to thousands. Right? Whenever somebody can commit a sin that has consequences, but usually within 3 or 4 generations, the consequences are no longer felt. Right? Because usually by then it's like, okay, and how serious is your sin? Like, it's like usually eventually you can work your way out of it. But God can bless people, and he can take care of them and provide for them in a way that it is felt throughout the rest of human history. Right? And that's just because that's who God is. God is somebody who provides. And I think you see this whenever you look to the people of Israel. I mean, he's still showing them Hesed right now. The fact that Israel exists is crazy. I mean, does Babylon exist? No. Does Assyria exist? No. Like, do all these other people, like all the nations that we hear about, the Amorites, do they exist? No. The Canaanites? No. Israel still exists. And so we do see God showing this Hesed to them, even in light of their rejection. Right? Because that's where we kind of land right now. Like, from the New Testament perspective, they've rejected their Messiah. And God's still not done with them, but that's kind of where we're at. And so it's kind of crazy. But do you have any other thoughts you want to say about that? I will say that I think hearing the 10 Commandments the second time, I feel like it weighs a little bit heavier because, again, like we were saying, they had the opportunity before to speak to God directly, but they chose not to. They chose to put this distance in between them. And now they've worked their way further and further away to where that generation doesn't even get to enter the promised land, and now it's their kids. But they have taken away the opportunity for their kids to be able to speak directly with God.
Yeah.
So there's like this distance in between to where now they're hearing it again. It's the same commands, but there's kind of like this weight to it because now it's just Moses saying it, and God isn't as close. And his whole goal is to dwell with man again. And so it's kind of sad. But
yeah, and really, this whole Ten Commandments thing, just so you don't think we're reading too much into this,
yeah,
it's bookended in that way in Deuteronomy. Like I said, right before the Ten Commandments starts, Moses is saying, "The Lord spoke face to face with you at the mountain from the middle of the fire. I was standing between the Lord and you because you didn't want to be near to him."
Yeah.
Then he gives the Ten Commandments. And then once you finish the Ten Commandments, starting in verse 22 of the same chapter, it says, "The Lord said these things to your entire assembly at the mountain from the middle of the fire, the cloud, and the darkness with a loud voice, and that was all he said. Then he inscribed the words on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me." And so Moses is reminding them, hey, the first time you heard these, it was from God himself.
Yeah.
But now it's from me.
Yeah.
And it's like, so literally it's bookended that way, where he reminds you, this is how it was, this is how it is.
Yeah.
That's why it's important that you keep these commandments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really these commandments kind of just embody most of the rest of the law, right? I mean, like, it kind of hits, like, the major points.
Yeah.
Really, specifically, probably the first, like, 3 of them, maybe the first, like, 4. Not probably first 3. They really embody it, right? He must be your God, right? Yeah. Worship no one but Yahweh. Mm-hmm. Don't make a carved image. Honor his name. If you, like, embody those 3, all the rest will follow. And so this really does hit a little bit differently. And I know it is largely repetition from Exodus, but I still thought it's worth kind of diving into there. I mean, I don't want to just, like, glaze through something and be like, oh, we already covered this. Yeah. The Bible chose to repeat it for a reason.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Moses didn't say, hey, go back to that book I already wrote. No, he felt a need to restate this to the people. And so now we move on, and we'll go to Deuteronomy chapter 7, which is only 2 chapters later. That is what my seminary studies have taught me. 5 plus 2 is indeed 7. And what happens in between this is really one of the most significant shifts in Deuteronomy, but also one of the most significant moments in the entire Torah. Because basically, after Moses gives the 10 Commandments again, then he just kind of recaps what happened at Sinai and what's happened since then. And then you eventually get to chapter 6, which if you go down to verse 4, you get the most famous verse of Torah in to all Jewish people, right? It's the thing called the Shema, where it says, "Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God. Yahweh is one. You must love Yahweh your God with your whole mind, your whole being, and your strength," right? You must love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, all that stuff. Yeah. He says it right there, right? And this is where he really begins to articulate all the main points of just the law and what's going on here. Deuteronomy 6, just to kind of summarize, whenever you were reading through it earlier, did you go through this part too? Okay, no, I wasn't sure. What I'm going to do is, I have not studied Deuteronomy that much recently. I'm going to read the headings of just like what the Net Bible puts here, just to give us a little bit of recap of some of the context. But we do know that it gets like the whole Shema thing, which is like where he's just saying, hey, this is important, and according to Jesus, that is the most significant command in the entire Bible, right? Love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. That is the one thing, and then love your neighbor as yourself, right? Yeah. And so, according to the Net Bible here, right? Hey, if I'm not summarizing the context well, blame the Net Bible, not me. After the Shema thing, he starts... Oh, that came up on my screen. That's not good. Okay. Exhortation to teach the covenant principles. So he's just telling them, hey, you need to teach these things to other people. This is where he talks about putting stuff on your head and binding it on your arm and everything. Exhortation to worship the Lord exclusively. Exhortation to obey the Lord exclusively. Exhortation to remember the past. Right? So he's just telling the people, hey, focus on God. Focus on God. Focus on God. Obey God. Obey God. Obey God. Don't forget the sins of your fathers. Don't forget the faithfulness of God in the past. And he's just kind of walking through the whole story and just telling them his final words, right? Once again, this is why I like Deuteronomy so much. Deuteronomy is just such a good message because it's a faithful leader who really understands the heart of God, talking to a people who really need to be reminded of God's heart. Yeah. And the way he conveys it is very, very different than how we typically would, because it goes back and forth between, like, it recounts history, it recounts commands, and it also highlights the importance of the commands. Yeah. Right? It's not just about empty obedience, it's about the heart, and the way Moses juggles all these is just really brilliant.
Yeah. And also, we've talked a lot about, like, Moses' kind of, like, character arc, too. Moses knows that he isn't going into the promised land whenever he says all of these things. God has already told him that he's not going to enter, but yet he still leads the Israelites like a good leader should, which is really admirable. And God tells him that he's not going to enter the promised land. He tells the people that, tells them some commands, and then he talks with God again and is like, hey, can I please, like, go into the promised land? He, like, pleads with him and asks, and God's like, I'm sorry, you can't. And yet after that, he still continues to lead the people the way he should. So we've seen that Moses really understands that God cares for the heart. And we also see, like, how good of a leader he really is. Like, he's a very admirable person.
Yeah. He's not saying, follow God to get what you want. Yeah. Because Moses is not getting what he wants.
He's living it out.
Yeah. But Moses from the beginning recognized that it wasn't about the promised land. It was about being with God. And so as much as he wants to go into the promised land, he still achieved his heart's desire, right? He still got to be with God. And God's going to be the one who does his funeral service, right? God's going to be the one who buries him, and it's going to be really cool. And so Moses really does get it. And that eventually leads us to chapter 7. And what we'll do is I'm just going to read through verses 1 through 6 to give us some good context. And then we'll go through this, and then we'll wrap it up, right? So who knows? Maybe we'll go shorter, maybe we won't. Maybe we'll manage to pad this out. I have no idea. So starting in verse 1 of chapter 7. When the Lord your God brings you to the land that you are going to occupy and forces out many nations before you, Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and powerful than you, and he delivers them over to you, and you attack them, you must utterly annihilate them. Make no treaty with them, and show them no mercy. They're gonna... we'll see how that turns out in the book of Judges.
Not too good.
You must not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, and take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your sons away from me to worship other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will erupt against you, and he will quickly destroy you. Instead, this is what you must do to them. You must tear down their altars, shatter their sacred pillars, cut down their sacred Asherah poles, and burn up their idols. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. He has chosen you to be his people, prized above all others on the face of the earth. And so in verses 1 through 6, we have once again Moses continuing with the same type of things he's been saying so far. Focus on God alone, but now he's practically applying this to, when you get in the land, what are you supposed to do? Wipe out everybody. Yikes. Sounds pretty scary, but that's what God says to do, and I don't think we should question it. A lot of people are like, ooh, that seems like a big, bad, mean God, and I'm like, well, maybe you just need to recognize that God knows more than you do. And trust that the God of the universe knows more about morality than my tiny 3-pound brain can handle. But yeah, Moses, like, this is a very extreme thing. God says, wipe them out. Kick them out, wipe them out, whatever it is, get them out of the land. Don't intermarry with them. Don't make a treaty. This is your land. I'm giving it to you. It is a conquest. And that's what it is, right? There's no way to get around it. That's what he's telling them to do. But it's because they are to be a holy people, prized by the God of the universe above all of the nations. So when you think about it, okay, if one, like, which is weightier there, right? Okay, conquering people or being the prized of God. Well, okay, you can see why God's doing this. Like, he's making them a holy, set-apart people so that the rest of the world can look to them as a shining example of what God wants, right? And they're supposed to be an example of how to be close to God again. And so they need to kick everybody out. Like, there's no way for them to be mixed with other people and still accomplish the task that God has given them. And so they have to kick everybody out, and that's setting up the context right here. Now we move into verse 7, and I'm just going to read the slide, and then I'll hand it over to you to see what your thoughts are. It is not because you were more numerous than all the other peoples that the Lord favored and chose you. For in fact, you were the least numerous of all peoples. Rather, it is because of his love for you and his faithfulness to the promise he solemnly vowed to your ancestors that the Lord brought you out with great power, redeeming you from the place of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So realize that the Lord your God is the true God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant faithfully with those who love him and keeps his commandments to 1,000 generations, but who pays back those who hate him as they deserve and destroys them. He will not ignore those who hate him, but will repay them as they deserve. So keep the commandments, statutes, and ordinances that I today am commanding you to do. If you obey these ordinances and are careful to do them, the Lord your God will faithfully keep covenant with you, as he promised your ancestors. He will love and bless you and make you numerous. He will bless you with many children, and with the produce of your soil, your grain, your new wine, your olive oil, and the offspring of your oxen, and the young of your flocks in the land that he promised your ancestors to give you. You will be blessed beyond all peoples. There will be no barrenness among you or your livestock. The Lord will protect you from all sickness, and you will not experience any of the terrible diseases that you knew in Egypt. Instead, he will inflict them on all those who hate you. And we do see that happening as well, as we go throughout the rest of the Old Testament. Yeah. What do you think?
This ties in really well to Deuteronomy 5 because it's kind of restating the commandment in a way, talking about how he's going to keep his covenant. So in verse 9, again, we kind of see that contrast between punishing those who disobey and then showing this Hesed, this covenantal Hesed to thousands of generations. So then the next question would be like, okay, if I'm, to the people of the Israelites, if they're hearing this, the question would be, okay, if I want to like take the Hesed, not the punishment, what do I need to do? Yeah. So then you go down to verse 12, and it says, if you obey these ordinances and are careful to do them, the Lord your God will be faithful. He will show Hesed. So there it is. You're like, you can choose between punishment or you can choose between his Hesed. So now the Israelites are, okay, we obviously want the Hesed because that sounds a lot better. So then it's like, okay, well, how do we do that? How do we actually carry that out? So then he tells them in verse 12. And then everything after that is like, okay, if we show that, how do we know that God is showing Hesed? What does that physically look like? From 13 all the way through, he's showing you what you're going to reap from sowing the seeds of being faithful to him. What are you going to reap from it? You're going to be numerous. You're going to have new wine and grain, and your livestock will be good. You won't go barren, all of those different things. So we see the progression from verse 9 all the way through to the end of kind of realizing it with the Israelites and kind of what questions they would be asking, especially because it's a brand new generation. Their parents and their forefathers are gone, so they probably have questions too. So,
yeah. I also just really like this from a narrative perspective, I guess. I always bring this up that I just like reading, and it's just such a sweet speech that Moses is sharing here. Yeah. Because he literally just pointed out in the verses before this, he's talking about, hey, God's going to deliver you from the Amorites, the Girgashites, these 7 nations that were more numerous than you. Yeah. And so he's like, I can think just on the top of my head, the people dwelling in Canaan right now, they are all more numerous than you were. And than you are. Yeah. Right? They are bigger than you. And so he goes into this verse saying, it's not because you were more numerous than all the other peoples that the Lord favored and chose you. For in fact, you were least numerous of all the peoples. And so we get this, how this is setting up Hesed. Yes. Right? Because it's saying, okay, well, like, because I think that's the temptation. We feel this as Christians. Yeah. That's how Jewish people felt a lot of the times, where it's like, oh, we are the chosen of God. Yeah, it's of their own doing. Yeah, there must be something special about us. And Moses is like, remember your history. Why do you think he included the book of Genesis? Right? Why do you think that the Torah doesn't begin with Moses' story? It begins with Genesis because you need to know where you came from. Yeah. And that's why Moses puts it there. And he's like, remember, you did not come from anything special. You came from a random old guy with a barren wife. Right? You didn't have a bunch of people. Yeah. No, God just plucked you out, and he chose to make you a nation. Yeah. And then, Abraham, I know we say he had a bunch of sons. I think he had like 7 sons. Yeah. Which is a lot. But only one of them was from the chosen race, like Isaac, right? Yeah. And so Isaac, that's one kid. And then there's Jacob. It's like, well, Isaac had 2 kids, Jacob and Esau. Right. But Jacob was the chosen one, right? Yeah. So for 3 generations, it's just one, right? So don't act like you were all, amazing stuff. Yeah, you're not high and mighty. You were tiny. You were tiny, so small, living in this land that you didn't even own. Yeah. So don't think that God chose you for any special reason. Instead, it's because of his Hesed, right? Rather, it is because of his love for you and his faithfulness to the promise he solemnly vowed to your ancestors. That's kind of weird. It seems like a circular argument. Right? Don't think that God made this covenant with you because you're so big. Rather, he made this covenant with you because of his love and his faithfulness stemming from the covenant he made with you. Yeah. It's like, wait a second. Yeah. Hold up. But it is circular because the ultimate, I think what Moses is admitting here is that there's no answer to this. Right. Right? God doesn't choose to love Israel for a reason other than the fact that his love and faithfulness to them has already been decided. Right? He chose Abraham. He chose Isaac. He chose Jacob. He chose Israel. Yeah. And therefore, his love and favor is upon them. And we see that whole linguistic gravity principle coming in here, right? Because it's setting up Hesed, right? Why does God love Israel? Why does God love us? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. He's just God. He just does that. That's who he is. Why is he faithful? Because God cannot be unfaithful.
Yeah.
It's against his nature, which is crazy. Because, like, who are we to deserve such a great big God? I mean, the God of the universe could literally be anything, right? He gets to decide what is good. He gets to decide what is true. He gets to decide what is beautiful. And for some reason, the God who created everything, the God who is, literally decided that love and truth and beauty should be things that benefit man, which is crazy, right? I mean, if I were God, I probably wouldn't do that. If I were standing in God's place, I would probably define love as something that purely benefited myself.
Right.
I would define justice as something that purely benefited myself. I would define worship as something that purely benefited myself. But instead, God decides to define these things in a way that actually benefits others. And if I were God, I probably would not be that gracious.
Right.
Here, I'm giving everything to every single being that ever existed. And the most esteemed of all creation decide to reject me. I'd say, okay, screw y'all. But that's not how the God of the universe works. Instead, he's chosen to be gracious. And so we see that he's got this love. He's got this faithfulness to this promise that he vows to the ancestors. It's like, the God who created all things made a covenant, and he sticks to it. Yeah. But the covenant is made with tiny little man. Like, that's crazy. Like, how big God is, how small we are. Like, why is God in the business of making a covenant with us? That's like me making a peace treaty with an ant.
Right.
Like, who does that?
Yeah.
But God does it. And if I went and made the peace treaty with the ant, I wouldn't feel that bad about it if I broke it. Right? Because I'm like, okay, the ant, like, probably doesn't even understand the full ramifications of this whole thing, right? I mean, he's a lot smaller than I am. He doesn't understand everything I'm saying. Yeah. That's how God is. Like, we don't understand everything he's saying. We just understand the bare minimum. Yet for some reason, he's faithful to it. And so Moses is emphasizing all these things because he's pointing out that this is who this God is. And don't think that it's about you. Don't fall into the temptation of thinking that you deserve God's grace. Don't think that you deserve his love. Don't think that you deserve his faithfulness. Don't think that you deserve his Hesed. By definition, all of these things cannot be deserved. They can only be given. Don't think that you deserve the land into which you're going. Your ancestors have proven that you don't. Because it was a gift. And they rejected the gift, and so they didn't get it. Yeah. It's not, entitlement is not a thing here. Rather, it's because of his love for you and his faithfulness to his promise he solemnly vowed to your ancestors that the Lord brought you out with great power, redeeming you from the place of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt.
There's that call back to Egypt again.
Yeah. It's always looking back, right? Don't forget your past. Don't forget where you started. Don't forget what God has taken you through, right? You started as Abraham, an old dude with a barren wife who couldn't even get things right most of the time. Right? Yeah. All he did was respond by faith. And then he had Isaac, then he had Jacob, and then they went down to Egypt, and y'all were slaves, but God took you out of there too, right? He's literally just recounting the history. And this is not the first time. Right. He recounts it multiple times throughout Deuteronomy because it's so crucial. Yeah. That's why we study our Bibles, right? Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. That's why we study this thing. There's other reasons as well, right? We would not know very much about God at all if it weren't for the Bible. But we study it again and again and again. And once we finish Revelation, we go back to Genesis every time. Because the more we study this, the more we learn about how to respond to God properly, about who God is, about who we are, about what's so crucial about God's character. And that's what Moses is emphasizing here. He says, you were not important, yet God chose you. You were not important, yet God saved you. So realize that the Lord your God is the true God. There's only one, right? There are other gods out there, right? There's other spiritual forces. There's other ones that all these different pagans are worshiping. There's other gods, but this is the true God. And this is the faithful God. This is the one who doesn't turn his back on people. I wonder, I didn't look up the Hebrew here, but I imagine that one of those is probably the word emet, right? Either true or faithful. I imagine it's one of those. This is the true God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant Hesed with those who love him. How can Moses say that? Because that's how God identified himself. Right? Back to Exodus 34. We're going to be, going forward, we're constantly going to be calling back to Exodus 34. Because because there's certain things that are just blanket statements that you can't say unless God has claimed this for himself. Right. Notice how nobody said this about God prior to Exodus 34. Nobody said he keeps covenant Hesed. Because by definition, you cannot expect Hesed. Right? But God has said, I keep Hesed. I am a God of Hesed. And so Moses can say that. All of a sudden, the unexpected becomes expected, because that's who God is, right? He said that basically, whenever he says, I am a God of Hesed, he's saying, get used to different, right? Expect the unexpected. I am going to do things in a vastly different way than you would typically expect. I will take you out of the land of Egypt, and instead of taking you across dry land, I will take you to the sea, and I'll part the waters.
Yeah.
Right? Whenever you get into the wilderness, instead of taking you to an oasis where you can get food and water, I'll rain bread from the sky. Right? Like, I am going to do things a little bit different. You're going to have to get used to it. And so that's what Moses is telling them here. You weren't important, God chose you. You weren't important, God saved you. And that's because God is somebody who keeps covenant Hesed. Because of the covenant he made with you, he's always going to do the things that you have no right to expect, but now you can expect them to happen nonetheless.
Yeah.
And the point is the right to it, right? You expect the unexpected, but you have no right to it. Right? You're not allowed to feel entitled to this. God just does it because that's who he is. Right? Because I don't know if that made sense. That was more like a mathematical equation of grammar.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The expect the unexpected, but you have no right to it. Expect, unexpected, cancel each other out. The only thing left over is the right.
Yeah.
Right? You can't feel entitled to this.
Right.
You're not entitled to Hesed. God freely gives it. He keeps it with those who love him and keep his commandments. That's important to clarify. God doesn't just blanket keep Hesed with everybody.
Yeah.
He specifies here there is a conditional statement. He keeps Hesed with these individual people, right? Those who love him, those who keep his commandments. So if you want God's Hesed to be kept towards you, you better be loving him, keeping his commandments, aka identifying with the covenant.
Right.
Which is just saying he keeps his covenant promises to those who are part of the covenant.
Yeah, and then also they would know from hearing that, they'd be like, well, our parents would be an example of what not to do.
Yep.
Because they aren't being shown Hesed because they aren't getting to enter the promised land.
Yep.
So what do we not do? What's a good example to not follow by? Do the opposite of what our parents did. Yeah. Don't do what they did.
Yeah. Little sister, don't you do what your big sister done. It's an Elvis quote. And so, Lord your God is the true God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant Hesed with those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations, but who pays back those who hate him as they deserve and destroys them. That's important there as well, right? This is just more important from an application perspective, just because of how our world feels about all this stuff. They always talk about, oh, I can't believe God would do this to so-and-so, or I can't believe that God would send people to hell or something. But notice how Moses puts this. Pays back those who hate him as they deserve. Right? God's not being unfair here. He's not being cruel. He's doing what they deserve. And that's because technically we all deserve death. Whenever you reject God, whenever you actively work against the person who gave you life, you deserve worse than death. Right? That's just how things work. So he gives them as they deserve and destroys them. He will not ignore those who hate him, but will repay them as they deserve. So keep the commandments, statutes, and ordinances that I today am commanding you to do. We see that Moses, once again, gets the point. He holds the tension, right? Hesed and truth.
Yeah.
Right? God loves being gracious, but he has a standard. And if you love him, if you keep his commandments, he will show you that Hesed to 1,000 generations. No limit. But he does have a standard, and if you reject him, he will punish you according to what you deserve. Right? And this is consistent throughout the whole Bible, Old and New Testament alike. The New Testament does not lighten this. So Moses says, keep the commandments, statutes, and ordinances that I today am commanding you to do. Once again, if you read these as like some of his final words, like all of Deuteronomy, I believe, it just reads like his final words.
Yeah, yeah.
It adds this extra weight. It's like he's begging them, guys.
Please.
I have been leader over your families for 40 years. I've seen how stubborn they are. There was a point a few years back whenever God and I were talking, and he identified just 10 moments when they disobeyed, and that was only 2 years in.
Yeah.
We don't really know that much about what happened in the 38 years in between. We don't know that much.
Yeah.
But he says, guys, keep the commandments. Like, this is my final, request.
Yeah.
Do this. If you obey these ordinances and are careful to do them, the Lord your God will keep his covenant Hesed with you, as he promised your ancestors. He promised us in the past. He's not going to back off. the covenant. Like, once again, it seems kind of redundant. He will keep his covenant Hesed with you as he covenanted to your ancestors.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, he's going to keep the covenant. He will love you and bless you. I like how he begins to define what Hesed is.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Well, how will he show us Hesed? You mentioned this earlier. How will he show us Hesed? What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Is this just feel-good stuff? No, apparently. He will love you and bless you.
Yeah.
Love you means he'll show you the care that, he will take care of you. Bless you means he will give you the provision that you need. It's not like a prosperity gospel thing here. It is like, no, he will give you what you need. He'll provide for you. And he will make you numerous. Basically, he'll help them fulfill the mandate given to humans in Genesis chapter 1. Be fruitful and multiply, right? And fill the earth. Be a blessing. Yeah. He's undoing the curse of Genesis chapter 3, right? The word curse does not show up till Genesis chapter 3, and throughout Genesis we see the word popping up again and again and again to show that the world's becoming corrupted.
Right.
But God's constantly wanting to return it to a state of blessing. He will bless you with many children and will with the produce of your soil, your grain, your new wine, your olive oil, the offspring of your oxen, and the young of your flocks in the land that he promised your ancestors to give you. Wow, now this does sound, I'm going to say it, this sounds a little bit prosperity gospel-ish.
Right, yeah.
But that's because the people of Israel had a little bit different deal with God than we do. Right? The people of Israel did have a deal with God where it's like, hey, if you obey the law, and if you serve me with your heart, I'll make things go really well in the land.
Yeah.
This, once again, is not talking about salvation. It's not talking about, how to get to heaven, how to be with God. No. That's always by faith. But the people of Israel and God did have this kind of deal because they were supposed to be a set-apart people where people look to them and they're like, dang, I want to be there.
Yeah.
Right? Like, whenever you look to Israel, if they are being faithful, things are supposed to be going so well that they have the most fertile crops. They have the most amazing children. They live the longest. Like, they're just having a great time to where everybody should look to them and be like, yes, I want to be them. Yeah. Unfortunately, they never really live up to it. We're going to see that God is very gracious to them, and they'll experience hints of all this stuff, but it's never going to be fully realized until the end times. Right? I mean, the Bible does seem to talk about a day when all this will actually fully come to pass, right? Whenever the Dead Sea will become fresh water, and the mountains will drip with wine, and it'll be a result of the Messiah. Come back to our Isaiah series next week if you want to check that out. The young of your flocks in the land that he promised your ancestors to give you, you will be blessed beyond all peoples. There will be no barrenness among you or your livestock. The Lord will protect you from all sickness. You will not experience any of the terrible diseases you knew in Egypt. Instead, he will inflict them on those who hate you. Right? This is all. It's like utopia. Right?
Yeah,
this is it's a dream come true.
Ideal area that you could possibly be in.
Yeah, and Moses saying all you need to do is submit to his law. Yeah. Right? Obey his law, serve him with your heart. And Moses always emphasizes the heart thing, right? He always talks about love him and keep his commandments. It's never just those who keep his commandments. It's those who love him and keep his commandments. If you obey these ordinances, are careful to do them, do what? Love him and keep his commandments. Moses is very careful about that. Yeah. And so there's Deuteronomy 7. What else do you want to mention in regards to any of this? Because I talked for a really long time there, and I know that if I don't ask you to say something, somebody's going to mention it in the comments.
I will say that here we see the consistency of God, too. If we see, like, obeying him, keeping his commandments, and loving him, those are things from the very beginning that God has asked for. His standards have not changed, even though the people have. The people have disobeyed. They've been going up and down and being really faithful at some times, then being really bad other times, then coming back to him and then rejecting him and then distancing themselves. But he stays consistent. He doesn't move at all. So even as he's blessing him with all this stuff, the one thing that he asks is whenever you go into this promised land, you keep your faith in me and you love me, and this will all happen for you. Like, there's almost more work going on God's side than there is the people's side. Like, he's just asking for them to place their faith in him, and he's doing all of this stuff for them. He's like, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to give you all these crops. You're not going to be barren. You're going to have all this livestock. Like, it's going to go great for you, and all you have to do is put your faith in.
In addition to sustaining the heavens and doing everything else that God does.
Yeah. So it's crazy. Yeah.
No, really good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, do you have anything else you want to add to this before we close off the conversation on Deuteronomy?
Go read Deuteronomy 4, because I think it recontextualizes like all this stuff. Well, not recontextualizes. It adds a lot to it. Deuteronomy 4, what Moses says to the Israelites it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so good. I literally read it 3 times before I came here because it was so good. So go read Deuteronomy 4 if you have a chance, and then maybe go and rewatch the video or something like that.
No, that'd be good.
That's really good.
But yeah, so next time, which is not going to be next week, next time we come back to this series, we will be talking about Hesed in Joshua and Judges. I don't know if we're going to do just Joshua and then just Judges, or if we'll do all of them at one time. I think there's 5 occurrences, and so maybe we can just look through them ahead of time and see how fast we can get through them. Maybe we can knock them all out. I don't know. But yeah, so there is our final video going through the Torah when it comes to our Hesed series. And
that's exciting.
Now, like I mentioned, we're going to take a brief pause on this one. We're going to go back to the Isaiah series, and we'll start walking through that a little bit. Like I said, Brienne might join us there. I'm not sure. We're still figuring that out.
Yeah.
But I don't know how long we'll be doing that one, just because that does take a lot of preparation, and I'm not nearly as far ahead as I had originally hoped to be at this point, just because life has happened, and I've been a lot busier in certain places where, and in some places I haven't been as busy. In other places, I've been busier to where I just haven't had the time to actually really just do that. And so we will go to the Isaiah series for a little bit, and we'll do that. And Lord willing, before Christ returns, we will finish the book of Isaiah. And I don't even know. The rest of the prophets, eventually we'll get there.
Maybe.
We'll get there. I think I might go into some minor prophets after we finish Isaiah. Just to make us feel like we're making more progress. Right? Because Isaiah is so long. And then if we go straight into Jeremiah and Ezekiel, it's like, whoa, those are long books. Like, I feel like I just need some encouragement to like get through these and like maybe just like tackle some of the shorter books first. I don't know. We'll figure that out. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this. Once again, if you want access to these slides, we have them entirely for free at nowletsbehonest.com/resources. And also, if you would like to support us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/David Tate. Don't feel obligated to do it, but if you want to and if you feel so inclined, I would appreciate it. Also, I do apologize if I seem like I'm stuttering today. I don't know if I can tell it in my head. I don't know if y'all can tell this, but I'm extremely tired right now. I ran a 10K earlier this morning, like race, and I didn't get much sleep last night, and it just kind of hit me halfway through this video. And so if I feel like I'm like just like something, that's my bad. I apologize. And so thank you for sticking with us anyways. Brienne, do you have anything else you want to say?
I don't think so.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for being with me in this series so far.
Absolutely.
I hope that you can come back for the Isaiah thing a little bit. And if not, well, she'll definitely be back for the Hesed series. Well, Lord willing. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to keep a smile on your face. Don't let anybody steal your joy. And we will see y'all next time. God bless.
Bye.
You read a verse, you sing a hymn, the money's in the plate. Sundays you mark out for him, but even then you show up late. You bought the shirt, you wear the cross, but sin throughout the week. For 30 shekels and a noose, you kiss him on the cheek.